Hey, it's Em. And I literally, just a few minutes ago, finished Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is my second Emily Henry book. I read Book Lovers like 3 years ago, maybe. I don't know. I looked back at my rating for Book Lovers, and I saw that I gave it like a 4. I don't remember liking it that much, but I also don't remember a lot about it. So, except this kind of sense that I had been sold a rom-com and been given something different from that. So at least this time going into Beach Read, I knew I knew that it wasn't going to be a rom-com. It was really going to be closer to women's fiction with romance. And I chose this one because it was kind of really the only other Emily Henry that sounded interesting to me, mostly because, again, it had to do with writers. The reason I tried Book Lovers was because it was about, I think, editors or a writer and an editor. I don't know. Anyway, something publishing adjacent, because that's my realm, as it were. Did I like it? No. I mean, it's probably a 3-star read, maybe. I literally, just finished it. So, I'm still forming I was forming my opinion as I read. And things that felt real and true to me, like the whole inability to write, especially after being knocked sideways by life events and things like that. I absolutely 100% have had that happen. I've gone year and a half without writing at a time when other things have just made it impossible for me to focus enough. So that part I 100% understood, bought into. Pretty much everything else was a no. I guess for me, and this is just a me thing, for me when I read this main character, let's talk about the book in case you don't know anything about it. It is about January Andrews, who is a romance writer, a happily ever after kind of girl. She's in her late 20s, early 30s, and she had this, idealized childhood growing up. Even though her mother had had cancer a couple of times, she had beaten it both times. January's an only child, and as an only child, I definitely also kind of understand and identify with that, I guess. And then her father dies suddenly of a stroke, and she finds out her father had had an affair with this woman, Sonia, and also she's taking her father's death really hard, so her boyfriend of 6 or 7 years, Jacques, breaks up with her, and he's like a doctor, and she's losing her perfect life. Her life is falling apart. She hasn't been able to write another book, and she's got an agent breathing down her neck, and a publisher who's published her other books and is waiting for the next one. Gee, to have those problems. Anyway. And she's like, oh, and I'm broke. And I'm like, well, where did the money from your other books go? Did you invest any of that? Did you, I get it. She's not saying she's some bestseller. She is very clearly kind of, mid-range author, I would assume. And if you work in publishing, you know that a lot of times, especially in smaller publishers, you're not getting a huge advance or anything. But eventually, your name gets recognition. If she's got 4 books out, and they've been successful enough that the publisher continues to want more from her, then I can only assume that she has some money somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. Her dad leaves her a beach house in Michigan. She decides to go up there and finish the book that she needs to finish in order to actually have an income again. Wow. What a crazy random happenstance. This guy she went to college with, who's also a writer, but she writes happy-go-lucky, romance, and he's serious, They keep comparing him to Franzen. He says he wants to be Salinger. That gives you tonally where he's coming from. He happens to live in the beach house next door. Huh. Oh, who knew? Anyway, and it's about them reconnecting. They make this bet where she feels like he had always made fun of her for writing romance in college. And so she's like, well, why don't you try it? see that it's not as easy as you seem to think it is. And he's like, fine, if you write something that isn't... Hi, Crowley. If you write something that isn't... Hi. That isn't a happily ever after. You know, write something serious. I don't know. Anyway... So they do that. They describe the book she's writing. Well, the character describes the book she's writing. January ends up writing this book about like a family of circus performers or something. And that book sounded way more interesting than this. So part of their agreement is this kind of like one night a week she takes him on like some kind of romance lesson. Crowley, you cannot, no, sorry, baby, but you can't be there. And he takes her, well, some of what he's doing research on is about a local cult that had, like, it's no longer there. Their cult compound burned down, very Waco, I guess, but, so they're interviewing, like, cult survivors and stuff and visiting the cult site, which I had an issue with too, because they're just like, it's just sitting out there in the woods, and I'm like, no, there would have been YouTubers all over that place, there would have been teenagers who made that trek out there would have been graffiti, it would have been, you know, I just don't believe it's just sitting out there untouched. That's just me, again, looking for realism in this not quite a romance book. I don't know. My expectations were still, I guess, a little too high. Anyway, my issue overall is that this is women's fiction with, you know, it's a romance forward women's fiction, right? Like, we're talking about real life issues. The love interest here, he has an abusive childhood background, and January's dealing with the fact that her life as she knows it has exploded into little tiny pieces, whatever. But, like, obviously the point of the book is mostly about getting January and Gus together. And every time January talks about Gus, or, you know, she's like, oh, my stomach flutters and all this stuff, I'm being told it a lot, like repeatedly, but I am not feeling anything. It is so just matter of fact, and I just am not connecting with the feelings that she seems to be having, and I don't know. You know, if you're going to present me with this thing that is mostly a romance, and I'm not getting the feels, the book fails, right? Because, like, you can give me a pretty interesting story. I thought the bet was, you know, kind of a fun gimmick. I don't know, but there's some entertaining side characters. But overall, yeah, I mean, I didn't really, like, the main character, she starts out drinking a lot, and I was like, are we going to address, like, her alcoholism? That doesn't really get addressed at any point. Yeah, I don't know. It fell flat for me because of all of I think the only time I felt moved in this book is, and, you know, I guess spoilers, but when January goes to the marina and sees her father's boat, which has been named for her. And that kind of, like, my chest got a little tight then. Like, but other than that, yeah, it didn't do for me. She just keeps talking about how his mouth is crooked and how thick the veins are in his arms or something. I don't know. I still, despite all this, cannot get a very clear picture of this male love interest character. There's this friend that she texts with, and then that person just disappears through the middle of the book and comes back at the end, and it's just like, why is this even here? Why is this character even existing in this book? I mean, this book is 358 pages, you know, and it just didn't need to be, because most of the book is just them going on these weird little date/outings, and January kind of castrating herself for falling for this guy, calling herself a dumb bunny, and then, like, weirdly convinced that Gus has this thing where it's like one and done. He only sleeps with a girl one time and then he drops her. And I'm like, based on his like from when you knew him, and like, what do you she's like, oh, his rule is, only once. Like, and I'm just like, she has a relationship with him of a kind where instead of just making these assumptions, maybe have a conversation. I don't know. It felt very contrived in places like that where I was just like, and it just made the main character of that much less likable. Like, it just made me think she was even dumber. Like, I already wasn't super thrilled with her as a person, and she kept doing and thinking and assuming the dumbest things. And I was just like, yeah. And then at the moments where I was supposed to be feeling her, like, libido for this guy, I just wasn't. And so I'm just like, yeah, no. So, 3 star, probably more like, I guess more like a 2.5, 2.6. Like, I feel like there was like a good idea in here, and there was some, interesting things going on. The cult thing, which again just kind of disappears. Like, after all that, it doesn't really go anywhere. I don't know. Like I said, the book she was writing about the family of circus performers sounded way more interesting than anything I was reading in this book. So yeah, I guess what I'm walking away from this with is the understanding that Emily Henry is not for me. I guess I liked Book Lovers enough, but I think even if there were another book that she wrote where I was like, oh, that's an interesting premise, I probably wouldn't bother. Because it just, for whatever reason, her books just don't work for me. Her writing style or something, I don't know. So anyway, if you've read Beach Read, let me know your thoughts. If you've read some other Emily Henry book that you think magically wouldn't change my mind about her as an author, let me know that. I'm going to go back to The Philosopher's Flight after this. I needed to read this one real quick because, it's overdue at the library, and I keep getting emails from the library, and they're like, can we have our book back? And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. And then, actually, the other two I still have checked out are, like, due in a week. So, yeah, or less than a week now. So, yeah, I gotta get back on all the reading that I haven't been doing lately. But anyway, until next time, take care.